when we lose friendships, when we lose the need for community, we get so inside our own head that we can no longer even discuss issues that we disagree on because we break out against all sound judgment. We just can't have a conversation. There was a day when I could absolutely disagree with my neighbor on politics, but I gave him help and he gave me help because we needed it, and there was something above our petty disagreement about this or that or the other. But when there is no common need that is perceived, then our disagreements become our main point of interaction.
All right, we're talking about friendship today. What does it mean to live out the word in our friendships? And the first question that comes to mind is, why have friendships to begin with? You know, it's really easy to see the necessity of a relationship like a husband and wife relationship or a parent and child relationship. But the choice of friends seems more predicated on desire, less so necessity. But at the same time, I think we would acknowledge that we do need friends.
Well, before we decide if we need them, let's decide what one is.
Yeah.
You know, I think we do need to define what are you talking about when you say, do we need friends? I mean, I have a lot of friends, you know, probably more like acquaintances. I have a lot of friends on Facebook.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, that term has almost been hijacked by Facebook to say, hey, a friend on Facebook. But what are you talking about when you say friend? What does that mean to you?
Well, there's a couple of different ways to look at it. You could look at it as a friend is someone with whom you have a positive relationship who is not a member of your family, right? I say a positive relationship because you could also have an enemy, right? Or you could look at it in a different way such that you could say, well, this person is my spouse and my friend, or this person is my brother and my friend. Well, there you're clearly defining it differently. You know, in the Four Loves, C.S. Lewis associates it a lot with common interest. He says that a statement such as, what? You too? I thought I was the only one. That's sort of the birth of friendship. That it's finding out that you have something in common with someone that is not common to the larger group. It's something that you two share, and that shared interest or shared belief, like maybe it's that you're keyed into something that most people aren't keyed into, that becomes the medium through which your friendship exists. So you could think of it like maybe you work with 20 people and one of them really likes pickleball. And
Right.
You like pickleball and you're the only two, so you two go and play pickleball together. And your friendship is mediated by your common interest of pickleball. You don't spend time, you know, knitting patterns or watching movies or anything like that. You play pickleball with them.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, you can see how that would easily be the case with your wife or your brother or even your parents.
Mm-hmm. So if I play pickleball with somebody every other weekend,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't talk to them any other time, are they my pickleball associate?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what word to put on it. Or are they really a friend? What I mean, I see
yeah.
there's a common interest there. Like for instance, I've got a friend. I call him a friend who lives in Tennessee, who is a huge Florida State fan, and I graduated from Florida State. I'm a big Florida State fan. And so we often communicate about Florida State. You know, we watched the football game the other night. We texted each other during the football game. And we do talk periodically, but we don't hang out. You know, we don't we don't go to each other's houses for dinner typically. We've never done that. So is that a friend, or is that again just a somebody I have a common interest with that I enjoy bantering football about and complaining about the refs and that kind of thing?
Sure. So to go back to Lewis's language, he distinguishes between companions and friends. So he would say, let's say the friends that you know are Florida State fans who are watching the game when it's on, we could consider those your companions. Maybe you'd get together with them to watch a championship or something. But in that group, let's say there's someone with whom there is another commonality that is deeper. That is more of a friend, less of a companion. We could also think of the language of acquaintance versus friend. And I think that what we have a lot of today are acquaintances. We look at people sort of in the sense of, how can you benefit my life? What can you contribute to me? This would certainly be the case in a business relationship. People say, oh, business relationships business is all about relationships. It's all about making those connections and whatever. And the relationships there are generally instrumental in some way. It's not a relationship that's on the basis of our connection as people, but rather, what we have to offer one another from a business perspective. And that's different than friendship. Now, can friendships arise out of that? Yes, but because we collected 100 business cards at a conference doesn't mean we made any friends.
Yeah, and I have a friend. I'll use that word loosely. I have an acquaintance who is a salesperson, a very good salesperson. And what he will tell you is, and it's a little bit of a rabbit, but I think it helps on defining the definition and us kind of constructing what a friend is before we figure out, do we need them and what's the Bible say about them. When it comes to business, what he basically says is you have to make those relationships and be truly not focused on business. You've got to make a relationship where you truly care about the other person. You truly want to help them. You truly want to, he said, even if they never give you a PO for anything, right, you've got to have that. And he said, 9 times out of 10, eventually they will give you one if you develop that kind of a relationship, but it might be 3 years, 5 years, or longer before it ever comes around to business. But you have to truly care about the person. Otherwise, it is, like you say, it's just a business relationship, and I'm trying to cozy up to you otherwise. And so I think that definitely goes beyond business, because, a lot of people will try to get close to the people that they have something they want.
That's right. Yeah. You can have a business relationship with someone that has nothing to do with work. In the sense that you're just trying to get something from them, and maybe there's reciprocity there. They're just trying to get something from you, but still.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll just give an example of that. We live on a farm here. And so I have had people that I felt like were trying to befriend me because what they really wanted was access to the farm, for hunting or for recreation of some sort. And so it always made me suspicious. Are they really trying to be my friend, or are they really trying to gain something that they want? So that definitely, if the idea is to gain something in a unilateral way, I mean, friendships, I think, are beneficial. They're mutually beneficial. I think that would be maybe a key definition of a friendship, is a mutually beneficial relationship, not a one-way relationship, not a codependent a codependency type deal. So anyway, getting back, trying to define what friends are, I think that would be helpful to the understanding.
Yeah, what you said about the farm reminded me of some proverbs about friendship that may be a little bit uncomfortable for us, but I think we should deal with all the same. Proverbs 14:20. The poor is disliked even by his neighbor, but the rich has many friends. 19:4. Wealth brings many friends, but a poor man is deserted by his friend. And then in the same chapter, many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts. All a poor man's brothers hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursues them with words, but does not have them. I think that really speaks to the instrumentality of our friendships. I mean, even in the very idea alone that a rich man would have more friends than a poor man, and the ultra rich, the ultra famous, man, they have their work cut out for them when it comes to building relationships, because how can you ever know if someone is seeing through your wealth, through your success to you? How do you know if they're being genuine?
Well, that's the reason, Andrew, the birds of a feather flock together. That's the reason the wealthy have wealthy friends.
Yep.
Because when you have a wealthy friend, you think, okay, they got at least as much money as I do. They're not trying to befriend me to enrich themselves. And so, a lot of people wonder, maybe sometime, why do birds of a feather flock together? Those are some of the reasons and the dynamics. When you're on a level playing field, then it's easier to have a pure relationship, and it's easier when you're not on a level playing field. I think it's easy to be suspicious that the other person is trying to use this for means that are other than, or they're trying to use it for something other than a relationship that would be mutually beneficial.
Well, at the very least, it can become awkward at times.
Sure.
Let's say there's a rich man and a poor man and they're friends. The poor man falls on a particular difficulty. Let's say it's a huge medical expense or something. Well, then the rich man can easily help him out. And you could say, well, he should. But also, that could be demeaning in certain instances.
Well, and if you're not careful in situations like this, and I would say this about any friendship, not just a rich-poor friendship, is if he were to help that person, immediately the relationship has changed, except, and I would say all the totally best relationships, because now the rich guy knows, hey, I gave you a gift. Unintentionally, that could very easily create an expectation of something in return. The poor person would be like, oh, you just gave me a big gift. It now creates in them a feeling of I owe him something. And immediately the purity of the friendship is lost, because now we're dealing on a you owe me, I owe you situation, rather than the C.S. Lewis definition of we just choose our friends in a, because we want to, not because we need to or have to. So I think those are things that make friendships difficult.
Yeah. So on the matter of the definition of friend, the thing that we most need to know is, what is the Bible talking about?
Yes.
When it says friend. And although I don't really know the answer to that, I do know that I think it's different than what we think of as friend. Just a different world that we live in. There was a time in history, and I'm not saying this about biblical times necessarily, although I don't think it would be a surprise if that were the case, where the closest, most intimate relationships were between members of the same sex. In friendship, there were still marriages, but the marriages were not looked at as the locus of the most intimate relationship. Men, when it came time to talk about their feelings, talk about their struggles and whatnot, they went to their friends, not their wives. Now, that was probably a reflection of a much more, dare I say, misogynistic society. We live in a more egalitarian society where men and women are much more on level playing fields. and that's reflected, I think, relationally.
I think so, but I do see a trend over time where well, maybe, I don't know, maybe this is just my own experience, but where the closest friendship is the husband and wife, and I guess maybe we could say, is friendship the best way to describe that? I mean, when you get married, you're to become one flesh, so it's really almost like you're friends with yourself, with your spouse. You should treat them as yourself. And so, Jonna and I believe if she were here, we would say that she's my best friend, I'm her best friend. That's probably how we would describe that. But in the strict definition of the word, I'm not sure the word friend applies, because back to what you're saying, I think it should be a relationship that is freely chosen outside the bonds of either marriage or family. Family, historically for me, I would have said that my brothers were my closest friends.
Yeah.
And if you look at the interactions between myself and them versus myself and other people, you definitely can see there's a closer relationship there. We do more things together. We share more things together. We're more likely to visit one another and all those kind of things that you typically think of with a friendship. But again, I think I should just say, if we're being strict to the vernacular here, they're my brothers. They're not my friends. That's how I treat a brother. I'm bound by them, whether I like it or not. We have the same blood. So
right. That's an important point.
Yeah,
because insofar as your brothers are your friends, they're friends that you can't really get rid of. So that makes them different from
Absolutely.
other kinds of friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you don't choose your family, right? You do choose your friends, and
you can get rid of them.
And you can get rid of them. And, you could make the case that you can get rid of family too, but I find that it's just never quite that simple. So there's something about a blood relation that always finds its way back into your life.
Yeah.
But the question of, can lovers be friends? I just thought this was interesting. This verse in Song of Solomon, which is, of course, a back and forth between two passionate lovers. This is the feminine, the female speaking. I suppose her friends, the daughters of Jerusalem, are saying, why are you singling out this person? What's so special about him? And she goes on this beautiful sort of monologue about how wonderful her beloved is. And at the end, she says, his mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. And I think we'll see something kind of similar considering our relationship to Christ, because we see that Christ does relate to us in this sort of marital way as the bridegroom and us being the bride, but we will also see that we are called friends to Christ, and we'll get into that later on. So
I guess for our conversation moving forward, would it be safe to say a friend, for the purposes of our discussion and looking at what the Bible has to say about friendship and how we should live out the word in our friendships, that a friend is someone we have a common interest with, that we freely choose to associate with? We're not bound by family ties, marital bonds, or business bonds. I would put an asterisk by that one and say we can do business with friends, but I think we should not confuse the fact that just because we associate with somebody in the realm of business, see them regularly, enjoy their company, maybe business lunches or whatever that might be, there is still a tie there of the business. So there's an asterisk by that one. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it's a business associate. You have to look at that closely.
Mm-hmm. So with all of that said, let's say maybe we don't know exactly what friends are, but we've talked around it a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe we've gotten a little closer. Why do we need them? I want to share a few scriptures here. Proverbs 18:1. A lot of the scriptures we're going to read today come from wisdom literature. It has a lot to say about friends, even Job, which we'll get into. Proverbs 18:1. Whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire. He breaks out against all sound judgment. So you don't want to be a recluse. Yeah, you don't want to. Maybe we'll come back to that. Ecclesiastes 4:9-12. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. So, to bring in a little bit of a cliche, a friend in need is a friend indeed, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think it is the case that when something happens, something bad, that's when you find out who your friends are. And when something bad happens to one of your friends, this is where you have a chance to show yourself a friend truly. Mm-hmm. So, yes, you need friends. Isolation is a form of selfishness, but, in the self-interested sense, friends are there for you when you need them.
Yeah, I guess the question would be, are you there for them when they need you? Mm-hmm. Does it go both ways? Excuse me. It's interesting with friends. As you read that verse, I would have to be transparent and say I don't have a lot of friends, and being self-reflective through this, preparing for this, and us just talking about it, I have to say, maybe I don't because I am too self-centered. That's kind of a hard admission to make. I've got my own thing that I do, and I don't, quite honestly, sometimes I'd just rather be by myself doing it rather than having to negotiate. I'll give you an example. So I am a big hunter. I hunt here on the farm. Hunting is something we prep a lot for. I was out last night after dark planting food plots because right now is the perfect time. The weather's perfect. We got a rain. The ground's perfect. Everything's perfect. Probably in an ideal world, maybe I would have a friend to engage with, and I would find somebody who had a common interest. But, I like to hunt how I hunt, when I hunt. I don't necessarily want to have to bend my hunting style to somebody else or to accommodate their wishes in hunting. Yeah. So maybe that's why I don't have that many friends. I do have some friends, but what's your thoughts on that? Is that, you think that's typical? Am I being self-centered in that way? Should I bring somebody in? Is that the kind of thing we find common ground on and then build a true friendship on? Or just what are your thoughts on what I said there?
That's a good question. I think it can be self-interested when you're so enamored with your own way of doing things that you're not open to the idea of friendship. But I might also suggest that perhaps a friendship is born when you are interacting with fellow hunters and you find someone who goes about hunting the same way you do, right? Mm-hmm. And then you want to collaborate with them. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Of course, for that to happen, you have to put yourself in those situations. So the situations to be among other hunters, that I think is what is not isolating yourself. Mm-hmm. Now we will see that there are times when the people of God, the great men of God, the prophets, were isolated, but they did not isolate themselves. we'll get into this later, but they were isolated by circumstance, or maybe they were abandoned by their friends or something like that. I don't think that being alone necessarily is the issue, but shutting others out. And if you look at the latter half of this verse, whoever isolates himself seeks his own desire, he breaks out against all sound judgment. What that brings to my mind is someone who doesn't want the input of others, who's not open to instruction, who's just interested in their way of doing things, knows that others won't agree, and therefore refuses to listen to them or to even let them have a say.
Yeah, I could probably learn some things on that point, but to use my hunting analogy, or maybe it's not an analogy, maybe it's the reality of friendship. Yeah, I think we can go back and tie that back to something we said earlier about there needing to be a level playing field. So if I run into somebody who lives in an apartment in Nashville and they like to hunt and they want to be my friend to come hunt, it's not a mutual thing. You know what I'm saying? I've got something, I've got the opportunity to hunt. They don't, so they can't reciprocate that. And it makes me feel as if maybe they don't really want to be my friend. They just want access to my hunting property.
Sure.
Whereas if I bumped into somebody who had a farm, who could reciprocate, hey, we'll hunt your farm one weekend, we'll hunt my farm the other weekend, that kind of thing, I think I would be more open to that. And, you know, I do have a friend who has been over and hunted with me some, but it's not a, you know, he's over here helping me plant food plots and I'm over here at his place helping him erect tree stands or whatever. In that situation, it's kind of like we could be friends. We could do that together, but for whatever reason, we don't. I'm wondering if it's because he's thinking, I just kind of do it my way. And I'm thinking, I just kind of do it my way. When if we got together, we might both be better off. Even if we actually never even hunted together. If we just got together and helped one another in the prep and had the companionship of doing that part of it together. So anyway, I'm kind of just free thinking here as we go through this, but I'm trying to use that as an example. I mean, there's a lot of people that don't have hunting as a hobby. They play golf or they have some other pursuit. But I'm thinking it would be a similar type arrangement no matter what the commonality was in the friendship.
I can think of a few things that might be worth saying about that. First of all, regarding your suggestion about the person who lives, you know, in a high rise in Nashville, and you don't ever know if they just want to be your friend or if they just want you to be on your farm. Well, I think it's a mistake to ever look at friendship as a charity. Now, obviously, as Christians, charity is something that we absolutely endorse, that we should absolutely participate in. But that doesn't necessarily follow that should be the rule of friendship. As we said earlier, it creates at least an awkward, maybe even just a not so good dynamic between people. Now, on your point about, you know, what would happen if you and your friend interacted more and did more things together? What that calls to mind to me is the fact that friends keep us in check. We learn from them. Even if they never directly teach us anything, we learn about ourselves by experiencing their reactions to us. This is one reason that one who isolates himself breaks out against all sound judgment. If you leave a person alone for a long enough period of time, they will probably go insane, because we outsource the problem of sanity to our local community. So what does that look like? So for example, let's say you go to a party or a dinner or something and you're talking about something and you say something that you think is totally normal and you get crickets back. And you think, oh, that didn't go over so well. Or maybe you tell a joke and no one laughs. or maybe you express an opinion and it offends somebody. These are all indicators to you about yourself and about your views and whatnot that is really valuable, right? You use the people around you sort of as a gauge of whether or not you're on the right track. You know, if you're talking to someone and they're like listening and they're looking at you and they, have something to say back and it's an engaging conversation, you know that you two are on the right track. Well, at least you can also be on the wrong track. This is something about friendship that we need to get into, about how friends can lead each other astray. But for now, I'll let you have the floor.
Yeah, I wanted just to say something about back to, I know I'm using this hunting analogy, but I think it's helpful. So you go back to the guy that lives in a high rise and me on the farm. I don't think there has to be, I think I could be friends with somebody that didn't have a farm as a hunting companion and friend. Hunting could be what tied us together, even though they live in an apartment in Nashville and I have a farm. If I recognize I have a need, they obviously have a need. They don't have anywhere to hunt. They want to hunt. So that is the need coming my direction. The other way, what I have to do is identify an equal need.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be the same need. It can be a symbiotic relationship where we're providing each other different things. I think where we get into trouble and we don't have friends is when we basically look at ourselves and we say, I'm self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. I don't need other people. Mm-hmm. There's really nothing I need. I can do this by myself. Mm-hmm. Quite honestly, I think that's where we wind up with God too. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we're going to talk about at some point is, is God our friend? Is Jesus our friend? Well, not if we say, I don't need you. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
We have to identify the need in us. And quite honestly, we're so self-sufficient in the world today that we don't think we have a need. Mm-hmm. And that's probably why we have fewer close friends, and it's why we don't have a closer relationship with God, is because we think we're self-sufficient until we find ourselves in the ditch. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's something to think about. I guess maybe I'm not jumping tracks here, but I've got a next door neighbor who I would definitely count as a friend. Mm-hmm. We if I have trouble here on the farm, which I have had a few times, for instance, I ran my big tractor, slid off in a big ditch one time, couldn't get it out by myself. What do? I call my friend Mark. Hey, can you come over here? And he always does. And so we have that kind of relationship. We've also eaten at one another's houses and those kind of things. We share a common need here on the farm. And I think historically that was what created a lot of friendships, was there was more need, right? When you lived in community with people, then you had a group of people that became your friends because you shared common needs. I think if you look at if you just look at the little community we live in here now, it's a rural area. It's
not a metropolis by any stretch of the imagination.
It's not a metropolis. It's not a subdivision. I can't think of the word. There's not a house on every acre, and so, but there's houses all along, and we view this as community. But
right.
I have one neighbor, like I said, that are friends. We help one another with things. Okay, my other neighbors and I don't communicate about needs. They're apparently self-sufficient, mm-hmm. and I'm self-sufficient. Mm-hmm. And so that not only does it break down the need for friendship, it breaks down seemingly the need for community.
Yeah, right.
It extends to that. So anyway, I may be getting us off track a little bit, but I think there's a bigger picture here that goes beyond just me having a friend.
Yeah. And you say self-sufficient or independent. Those two things are largely viewed as virtues in this culture. Mm-hmm. I like the way Covey puts it his idea is that independence is better than dependence, but interdependence is better than independence, right? You know, what you say about your neighbor and needing some of his help, it brings to mind these instances that we hear about from time to time where, let's say, there's a big hurricane, like there is in Florida, right? People will lose all electricity. They can't go anywhere because everything's flooded or whatever. So then there's nothing to do, and they just pull out the lawn chairs and go sit around a little fire pit and get to know their neighbors for the first time. And even though, you know, there's some devastation, obviously, that has affected that, they think, oh, this is nice. We're a neighborhood now. That is a very modern thing. You know, I pointed out in a previous podcast that cars have affected distance where they would have purported to affect closeness.
Right.
There's a reason that the Amish don't have cars. And it's exactly what we're talking about right now. And say what you want about the Amish. They have way stronger communities than the rest of us do. And that's part of it. You know, when it comes time to do anything, it's like, I need to go to my next door neighbor for his help if I can't do it myself. You know, I'm not going to call some contractor that lives 50 miles away and give them a few $100s to do it, you know?
Yeah, so go back to that verse you were just reading and read the second half of that about judgment.
He breaks out against all sound judgment.
Yeah. Okay, so what I see, and maybe we're veering slightly away from the spiritual element of this, but in our world today, when we lose friendships, when we lose the need for community, which we act like we know we need it, but we act like we don't, then we get so inside our own head that we can no longer even discuss issues that we disagree on because we break out against all sound judgment. You know, we just can't have a conversation. You know, there was a day when I could absolutely disagree with my neighbor on politics, but, you know, I gave him help and he gave me help because we needed it, and there was something above our petty disagreement about this or that or the other. You know what I'm saying? But when there is no common need that is perceived, then our disagreements become our main point of interaction.
You know what that makes me think of? This is another modern thing that we have to deal with. I talked earlier about how when you go to a party, you learn some things about yourself, right? Well, let's say that opinion you expressed is offensive to the majority of people. Well, it's not offensive to everybody. And if you have access to the internet, you can find a group of people that is not representative of the population in general who agrees with you. And what I have seen is that things that were once rightly considered shameful are now worn as badges of honor because people find communities in which they all share this thing, right? And they embolden each other in what would otherwise be very embarrassing things, right? And so that has a deteriorating effect on society. And to your point, you can seek those people out on the internet, and then you don't have to talk to the other people who you disagree with, right?
Yeah, and I think, you know, we're not doing the social media podcast today. We've already done that one, but I think it ties into friendship. So what you're essentially saying is when the people that I interact with are the 100 people that live within a certain radius of my home, I have to negotiate our disagreements.
Yes.
I have to, you know, weigh what I'm saying against what they believe. When I'm casting my net across 1 billion people, I can find 10 that agree exactly with what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that is what happens when we get into our own little rut. And even though we've got other people, we're still leaving sound judgment because we found people who think exactly like we do. And I guess one thing that we should make a statement about is those people are not friends. The Bible has some specific things to say about friends pushing back against what you're thinking. I think if you look at the story of Nathan and David, I think that's a good example of Nathan being a true friend to David, because David made a mistake, and obviously Nathan got a word from God, but Nathan confronted him and said, hey, you are that guy. He tells the story. We're familiar with it. Hopefully most are. But he tells an analogy, and David gets all upset. And then Nathan says, you are that guy. And so he basically is calling him out and pushing back against the unsound judgment that David had. And the internet doesn't allow us to do that. If everybody on social media is agreeing with what you're saying, they're not your friend. Well, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. That's not what friends do.
That's right. Better is open rebuke than hidden love. Faithful are the wounds of a friend. Profuse are the kisses of an enemy. That's Proverbs 27, 5-6. So yeah, just because someone is, let's say, kissing you, or maybe we in modern times would say kissing up to you, doesn't mean that that person is your friend. So what we're talking about now is how friends can lead us astray. And I want to read a few verses that pertain to that. And this is really important because, as we have already discussed, you choose your friends, right? You don't choose your family, you choose your friends. You need to be very careful in the friends that you choose because of the influence they have on you. Deuteronomy 13 says, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son, or your daughter, or the wife you embrace, or your friend who is as your own soul, entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, which neither you nor your fathers have known, some of the gods of the peoples who are around you, whether near you or far off from you, from one end of the earth to the other, you shall not yield to him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pity him, nor shall you spare him, nor shall you conceal him, right? So what it's saying there is your friend can pull you away from God, can entice you to serve other gods. I think of Jonadab and Amnon. Amnon had this sinful desire, this erotic desire for his sister, and Jonadab, who the Bible describes as a crafty man, basically comes to him and is like, hey, we can work this out. And he crafts this scheme that enables Amnon to live out that perverse fantasy that he had, right? And after that, it was utter chaos and destruction.
Yes.
And let me go on here. Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Proverbs 22. Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare. And finally, we're hearing from the New Testament. Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. That's in 1 Corinthians 15:33. So, you will become like your friends. Whether you like them or hate them, you will become like them.
Yeah, and even the secular world, I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson, basically says, you put good people together with a bad person. The bad person always spoils the good people. It doesn't work the other way around because someone has to have their eyes pointed upward.
That's right.
And if they don't, it doesn't work. So this idea that I'm going to be a friend, and maybe we can talk about this in another podcast, but a follow on to this one is, how do we befriend the world? Why do we befriend the world? What should be our object in befriending that person? It's not the same as identifying that true friend like we've been discussing. That's a different scenario that we'll get into maybe on the next podcast.
Yeah, definitely. So lots of interesting things to think about here. We're going to go ahead and tie a bow on it today, but I encourage everyone to join us next time. We're going to continue to excavate this topic of friendship. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to give us a comment. Let us know what you think about what we're talking about. And please give us a high rating as well. And until next time, God bless you.